All right, 7 p.m., time to get started. Glad you're with us this evening. Hope you're comfortable and joyous. So why don't we turn our Bibles over to Numbers chapter 22. All right, there's our brother Tim is with us. Numbers chapter 22. While you're turning there, we'll have a word of prayer. All right, Father, thank you for your kindness and goodness. And thank you that the folks have tuned in tonight, that we might look at your word, learn some lessons from it, that we might glorify you in our daily walk, in our glorifying of you, in Christ's name, and amen. All right, as we turn over here to chapter 22, I'd like to talk about Balaam here for a little bit, and notice what's going on. It says in verse number 1, then the sons of Israel journeyed and camped in the plains of Moab beyond the Jordan opposite Jericho. Now, Israel has got to a place now where they're ready to go over into the promised land. Notice, beyond the Jordan opposite of Jericho is actually where they go in, all right? Then in verse 2, now Balak, the son of Ziphor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. So Moab was in great fear because of the people, for they were numerous, and Moab was in dread of the sons of Israel. Now, what he's talking about here, if you go right back up to chapter number 21, a lot of history here tonight, and notice verse 33. Then they turned and went up by way of Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, went out with all his people for a battle at Indral. But the Lord said to Moses, do not fear him, for I have given him into your hand, and all his people and his land. And you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon. So they killed him and his sons and all his people until there was no remnant left him, and they possessed his land. Now, it's talking about the Israelites. So what happened is Balak hears about this. Now they're at his doorstep, all right? And so he had great fear, as you see in verse number 3. Great fear. So Moab was in dread of the sons of Israel, okay, as you see this. So here's what happens in verse number 4. Moab said to the elders of Midian, now this horde will lick up all that is around us, as the ox licks up the grass of the field. And Balak, the son of Ziphor, was king of Moab at the time. So he sent messengers or ambassadors to Balaam, the son of Beor, at Pethor, which is near the river. Now, the river here mentioned is the river Euphrates, okay, in the land of the sons of his people, to call him, saying, behold, a people came out of Egypt. Behold, they cover the surface of the land, and they are living opposite me. So what's Balak here afraid of? Afraid that the Jews, or Israelites at this time now, were going to come and take over his land, just as they did to the previous kings, as you see it here, okay? So when we look at this, he sends a messenger or an ambassador to Balaam. Now, Balaam's going to be the character we're going to be looking at here tonight, and I think you'll find this very, very interesting. So when we come down to verse number 6, it says, now therefore, please come, curse this people for me, since they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I may be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and whom you curse is cursed. All right? So Balaam here had some kind of reputation as a sort of prophet, if you please. Whoever he blessed got blessed. Whoever he cursed got cursed. So in verse 7 it says this, so the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with their fees for divination in their hand, and they came to Balaam and repeated Balak's words to him. Now, this is it starts getting interesting here. Departed with their fees. So evidently it cost money to bring Balaam anywhere, to either bless or to curse. So these folks from Midian went up, they had their fees for what? Divination. Okay, divination. Now, you say, well, what is divination? I had to look this up. I didn't know exactly what it was. But divination is the practice of discovering the will of the gods, little g. Okay? The will of the gods, or consulting the gods to ascertain the future. So that's what divination is. And these people believed in it in those days. And Balaam didn't live near these folks. He was all the way up towards the Euphrates River. Okay. So he must have had quite a reputation here of being a person that could do this sort of thing. Okay. Now, some people thought that he was a sorcerer. But sorcery is different than divination. Okay. As you look at it, sorcery was an attempt to manipulate the world or to manipulate the gods, little g's. Okay. Where divination was the practice of discovering the will of the gods. Okay, as you see that, for consulting the gods to ascertain the future. So the diviners, or the dividers, if you want to call them that, believed God controlled the world. Okay? But the sorcerers believed that they controlled the world and the gods, as you see. So that's just a little different there, as you see. Now, it appears here that Balak wasn't looking for a sorcerer. All right. He was looking for divination to happen. He wanted to know something here. Okay. He wanted to know what the gods, little g, were thinking so he could prepare for what was going to happen as he foresaw with Israel. Okay. So when we see this, let me read verse 7 again to you. So the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the feast for divination in their hand, and they came to Balaam and repeated Balak's words to him. Now Balak says to them, spend the night here, and I will bring word back to you as the Lord may speak to me. The Lord here, well, in some of the older commentaries, they use the term Jehovah, and in the newer ones, they use the term Yahweh. All right. So at any rate, he is using the proper name here for God. All right. The proper name for God. And he's looking, to think if God may speak to him, Yahweh may speak to him. And the leaders of Moab stayed with Balaam. So they stayed the night with him. Then we come to verse 9. Then God came to Balaam and said, so God does come to Balaam, who are these men with you? Now, here's an interesting thing here. In verse 9, where it says, and God, and then now in verse 10, Balaam said to God. Now, the word God in both 9 and 10 is Elohim, all right, not Yahweh. So Balaam said to God, Balak, the son of Ziphor, king of Moab, has sent word to me. Behold, there is a people who came out of Egypt, and they covered the surface of the land. Now come, curse them for me. Perhaps I may be able to fight against them and drive them out. Okay? And to drive them out. Now notice what God says here as we look at this. Okay? Verse 12. God said to Balaam, do not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed. So God, Yahweh, tells Balaam, don't go. These people are blessed. Okay? Verse 13. So Balaam arose in the morning and said to Balak's leaders, go back to your land, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you. Now, let me say this. If the story would have stopped right here with Balaam believing what God had said, okay, that he could not go to give a curse or a blessing to these Israelites, things would have been really, really good. But that's not what happens. All right. So when we read verse 14, the leaders of Moab arose and went to Balak and said, Balaam refused to come with us. They didn't say why. Okay. Didn't say why. And didn't bring the Lord up or any of that sort of thing. Okay. So 15, then Balak again sent leaders more numerous and more distinguished than the former. They came to Balaam and said to him, Thus says Balak, the son of Zippor, let nothing, I beg you, hinder you from coming to me. For I will indeed honor you richly, and I will do whatever you say to me. Please come then, curse this people for me. I'll honor you richly. What's that sound like? More than I was willing to pay you the first visit here, okay? Please come then. So Balaam replied to the servants of Balak, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything, either small or great, contrary to the command of the Lord my God. Now, isn't that a statement? So here Balak is declaring what? That God is his Lord and God. And you know, I had to think about that for a while because of what I'm going to read later. But that's what he told these men. So watch what he says to them. Now, please, you also stay here tonight, just like the first group of people. And I will find out what else the Lord will speak to me. So he had confidence that God would speak to him again. Okay. So now when we come to verse 20, God came to Balaam at night and said to him, now watch what he says, if the men have come to call you, rise up and go with them, but only the word which I speak to you shall you do. So it's almost like he gives them permission here to go. But he tells them the only thing you can speak is what I tell you to speak. Okay? Now watch what happens. So Balaam arose in the morning and saddled his donkey and went with the leaders of Moab. And lo and behold, what happens in verse 22? But God was angry because he was going, and an angel of the Lord took his stand in the way as an adversary against him. Now he was riding on his donkey, and his two servants were with him. Now this word adversary in the Hebrew is the same one that's translated Satan in other places. Okay, an adversary. So the angel of the Lord then is going to be the adversary of whom? Of Balaam, because God is now angry. Now I'm going to be honest with you. When you read verse 20 and then come down and read verse 22, it almost looks like a contradiction here. God tells them, hey, if they come and ask you to go, go ahead and go with them. But then when you get down to 22, but God was angry because he was going. All right. He was angry because he was going. Now, why did the Lord change his response here? Okay, as you look at this, or did he change it? I mean, it's something to think about. Now I have 3 books that are commentaries, separate commentaries on Numbers. I have a couple study guides on Numbers. And I also have the Interpreter's Bible, which is about 15 volumes of the whole Bible. And they all say the same thing, that it's difficult to interpret what's happening here. Okay? But they do give some reasons and some thought to see what's going on as we look. Okay? Because when you look at this, okay, and see now verse 22, But God was angry because he was going, and the angel of the Lord took his stand in a way as an adversary against him. Okay. What would be the reasoning here? God has already spoken to him. All right. Already spoken to him. And as in verse number 12, God said to Balaam, do not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed. But then when you get to 20, it kind of reverses it. See, kind of reverses it. Now, there's a couple of things here. God, in verse 20, could have said nothing. All right. Balaam didn't ask him for anything. God could have said nothing. Things would have been fine. So why a different response from God? Well, I believe this myself, and this is what I've discovered from reading these different books, is that, and the opinions of men now. So that's where it is. God knew Balaam's heart. And the temptation of verse 18, where Balaam replied to the servants of Balak, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything, either small or great, contrary to the command of the Lord God. But the whole thing revolves around this house that's full of silver and gold. Because up in verse number 7, what did the people bring to Balak? Fees for his divination. So that was his reputation. That's who he was inside. He did things for money. And I think God knows that. He knew his heart there when he spoke to him in verse number 20, if you please. Okay? And so what I kind of think, and accept it or don't, get your own ideas about it, which is good, is that Balaam can exercise his free will here, all right? And he's going to go with these men, but only speak the words of God. But the way I picture this myself is, for all of you who have ever been a parent, you raised children. Did you ever have a child or children that desired something and just wouldn't let it go? And every 15 minutes or every hour, or 10 times a day, they were bugging you so they can go do this. And eventually he said, go ahead. The consequences are on you. And I think that's kind of what I see here. I mean, you might see it differently, and that's fine. Okay, good. So that's what, I see verse 22 as God being a parent. He was angry about it, but he let him go. Okay, but he let him go. So what happens here? Well, most of us know the story of the talking donkey, don't we? Okay, but let's notice this in verse 23. I'm going to write down through this, right? When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand, the donkey turned off from the way and went into the field. But Balaam struck the donkey to turn her back into the way. So Balaam didn't see the angel of the Lord, but the donkey did, right? And the donkey recognizes something here, that the angel has what? A drawn sword. So I wonder what that would mean. I mean, standing right there in the way with a drawn sword. Don't come any further. Only bad things will happen. So what's the donkey do? He turns into a field away from the angel there, all right? But Balaam struck the donkey to turn her back into the way. Then in verse 24, then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path of the vineyards with a wall on this side and a wall on that side. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she pressed herself to the wall and pressed Balaam's foot against the wall, so he struck her again. I mean, this donkey understands something here. She doesn't want to go further, but her owner keeps striking her. 26. The angel of the Lord went further and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn to the right hand or to the left. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she laid down under Balaam. She gave up. She laid down. Balaam's on top of her already, right? So Balaam was angry and struck the donkey with his stick. Struck the donkey with his stick. Okay? Now, when you begin to think about this, here's an animal 3 times struck by her master, all right? Not knowing that his donkey has seen the angel of the Lord with this sword. So what's the donkey trying to do with Balak? Protect him. Of course, he doesn't realize it because he doesn't have the eyesight here, all right? So what's going to be added to the story? Verse 28. And the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, what have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times? Now, this is beyond my comprehension. I do know this, okay? Can you think of any other time where an animal spoke to a person in the scripture? Anybody at all can think of one? How about in the Garden of Eden in chapter 3 of Genesis? Here Satan uses a serpent to speak to Eve. We know that story, right? Well, here God's using the angel of the Lord to speak to the donkey so the donkey can speak to Balaam, right? So it's not out of sight, I guess we would say, in those realms. So the donkey is speaking. Then Balaam in 29 said to the donkey, because you have made a mockery of me, if there would have been a sword in my hand, I would have killed you by now. He didn't have a sword in his hand, but who did? The angel. Here's this donkey trying to protect him. Okay. The donkey said to Balaam, am I not your donkey on which you have ridden all your life to this day? Have I ever been accustomed to do so to you? And what did he say? Well, no, you haven't. Okay. No, you haven't. So I think this is interesting. I want to read you something out of the Rational Bible, right? Concerning some thoughts here on verse 28, where it says, then the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and she said to Balaam, what have I done to you that you have beaten me these 3 times? Now, Mr. Prager here says this is all meant to be ironic. First, the donkey could see what a renowned pagan prophet, one who claimed knowledge from the Most High, Numbers chapter 24, if you want to read it, in verse 16, could not see. Second, the prophet who sought to subdue Israel with words could not even subdue his donkey, even when beating her. I mean, why was he going? He was going to get paid from whom? Balak, all right? The Moabites, so they could defeat the Israelites. But he couldn't even control and know what his donkey was doing, let alone what God was going to allow happen a little later on, okay, as you see that. Thirdly, Balaam exhibited less self-control than his donkey. He lost his temper and beat his animal, but the animal responded with tempered speech. It was Balaam who acted beastly, not the beast. Okay, not the beast. So, can a donkey speak? Well, we would say, of course not, right? What then is one to make of this part of Balaam's story? People do dismiss the veracity and wisdom of the Torah, and the rest of the Bible point to such stories to dismiss the Bible as a collection of fairy tales. Now, Mr. Prager offers us 2 responses. He says this: first, whether or not one takes this story literally is not important. What is important is the moral of the story. Then he quotes Mr. Wenham, who said this: to our astonishment, the donkey speaks. Such a thing would seem just as unlikely to the ancient Israelites as it does to us. It is immaterial to the story whether the donkey really spoke or whether Balaam just imagined it talking. Second, it takes a small mind to reject the most significant moral and theological document in history because one cannot believe that a serpent or a donkey spoke. All right. Now, another commentator brought up a point, of course, that I never thought of. If we go back to the creation account or the recreation account of Genesis 1 and 2, and Adam, God brought forth all these animals to Adam. Could any of them have spoken at the time? Who knows? Who knows? It's just a thought that some of the fellows bring up because we actually don't know what went on with Adam when he was by himself in the garden and he was looking for a helpmeet, okay, before Eve was brought forth, okay? So that's something else to think about. Have you all seen the Narnia tales? Yes, no, shaking your heads. Okay. Who speaks there? Yeah. Okay, the animals do. In fact, God himself is portrayed as a lion, and of course that was written by a good Christian man, that whole thing, C.S. Lewis, and it was for what purpose? To bring forth morality, moral stories. We know that when he wrote that, he knew that animals weren't speaking, okay, in the story, but the moral of the story continues on and on. So it was worth something here, okay? So personally, I believe that the donkey spoke, just like the serpent did, okay, as we see that, all right? Now, here's what goes on. So I don't know how much to read to you here, okay? I'm going to turn the page, and ultimately Balaam, okay, has his eyes opened. Notice verse 31 of chapter 22. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand, and he bowed all the way to the ground. So he's on the ground, sees the angel. Okay. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out as an adversary because your way was contrary to me." So when you go back and read, then again, verses 20 and 22, it was contrary to what God actually wanted. And so the angel is a what? He's an adversary to Balaam, okay, as you look at this. So in verse 33, but the donkey saw me and turned aside from me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, notice what it says, I would surely have killed you just now and let her live. So that's from the angel. So remember I said, I believe the donkey was protecting him. Okay. Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned, for I did not know that you were standing in the way against me. Now then, if it is displeasing to you, I will turn back. Now watch what happens again, another turn in the story. But the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, go with the men, but you shall speak only the word which I tell you. So Balaam went along with the leaders of Balak. Now here's, I think, the gist of the story. God had a purpose in all of this. And the purpose is going to be, as we're going to read, is that the Israelites were his people. And no matter how evil they had been, and how much rebellion we have seen throughout the book of Numbers, okay, they were still God's people. And he was going to bring them to the land, although in a different generation, right? So as we come on then, verse 36, when Balak heard that Balaam was coming, he went out to meet him at the city of Moab. which is on the Aron border, at the extreme end of the border. Verse 37. Then Balak said to Balaam, did I not urgently send to you to call you? Why did you not come to me? I am really unable to honor you. Am I really unable to honor you? So Balaam said to Balak, behold, I have come now to you. I am able to speak anything at all? Question mark. In other words, his tone, am I able to speak anything at all to you? Question mark. The word that God puts in my mouth, that I shall speak. That I shall speak. Now watch what happens. And Balaam went to Balak, and they came to Kerithoth, Huzaz. Balak sacrificed oxen and sheep and sent some to Balaam and the leaders who were with him. Then it came about in the morning that Balak took Balaam and brought him to the high places of Baal, and he saw from there a portion of the people. But watch what happens now. Then Balaam said to Balak, build 7 altars for me here, and prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams for me. So that's a lot of bulls, a lot of rams. 7 altars. Okay. Looking to what? Find, if you please, favor from God. But what history teaches us in the scripture is that the Jews at any given time only had 1 altar at a time. You know, even with it starting with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, as you go through, then when the tabernacle, 1 altar, the temple, 1 altar, okay, at a time, until after Solomon and the nation split. Then you had the northern tribes and southern tribes. Then you had 2 altars, but not at the same time. But what this was, if you please, this was something that took place in Mesopotamia and in Babylon, where they would have 7 altars, one right after another, and do their offerings. So it was a pagan ritual here. And so what Balaam is doing is telling Balak, build these 7 altars, which tells us actually the very heart of Balak. Okay. He is not Balak, but Balaam. He's not, God is not his Lord. In pretense he was, but now he's not really. But as you go through here, all right, let me see where I can come to. Verse 3 of 23. Then Balaam said to Balak, stand beside your burnt offering, and I will go. Perhaps the Lord will come to meet me, and whatever he shows, I will tell you. So he went to a bare hill. He went to meet God in a mountain, is what he did. Now God met Balaam, and he said to him, I have set up 7 altars, and I have offered a bull and a ram on each of the altars. Then the Lord put a word in Balaam's mouth, and he said, return to Balak, and you shall speak thus. So he returned to him, and behold, he was standing beside his burnt offerings, as he and all his leaders were. Okay? So he took up his discourse. Now, I'm not going to read the whole discourse, but watch this in verse number 8. How shall I curse whom God has not cursed? Now, where's he getting his words from, according to the passage here? From God himself. Okay? And how can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? As I see him from the top of the rocks, and I look at him from the hills, behold, a people who dwell apart, and will not be reckoned among the nations. Remember, Balak took him up to the place where he could see part of the nation of Israel. Okay? So I slide on down then, okay, after Balak hears what he said, all right, verse 11, then Balak said to Balaam, what have you done to me? I took you to curse my enemies, but behold, you have actually blessed them. So Balaam replies, must I not be careful to speak what the Lord puts in my mouth? And so Balak, and I'm not going to read the whole thing here, he says, well, listen, come to me to another place. So they come to another place at the top of Pisgah, and they build 7 more altars and offer a bull and a ram on each one. And then in verse 15, and he said to Balak, stand here beside your burnt offering while I might myself meet the Lord over there, just like he did with the first one. Then the Lord met Balaam and put a word in his mouth and said, return to Balak, and thus you shall speak. So he returns there in verse 17. Verse 18, he takes up his discourse. And notice verse 19. You can go back and read the whole thing, but verse 19, God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. Verse 20, behold, I have received the command to bless. When he has blessed, he cannot revoke it. Okay, cannot revoke it. So notice verse 24, behold, the people rises like a lioness, and as a lion it lifts itself. It will not lie down until it devours the prey and drinks the blood of the slain. So what did Balaam, speaking the words of God, just tell Balak? They're coming for you, just like a lion does. Okay? Verse 25 then reads like this. Then Balak said to Balaam, do not curse them at all, nor bless them at all. So now Balak, understanding what's going to happen, he wants to be neutral in this whole thing. But verse 26, but Balaam replied to Balak, did I not tell you, whatever the Lord speaks, that I must do? Okay, that I must do. So as you go down through this and get to verse chapter 24 and verse 1, when Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he did not go as at other times to seek omens, but he set his face toward the wilderness. And Balaam lifted up his eyes and saw Israel camping tribe by tribe, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he took up his discourse and said, and so he starts another discourse. In other words, they didn't build the 7 altars this time. They didn't offer anything to God. Balaam knows what's happening now, okay, with God. So right there in verse 3, it says the oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor. Okay, and it goes all the way down there to verse number 9. And again, watch this, verse number 9. He crouches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion who dares arouse him. Blesses everyone who blesses you, and curses everyone who curses you. Then Balak's anger burned against Balaam, and he struck his hands together, and Balak said to Balaam, I called you to curse my enemies, but behold, you have persisted in blessing them these 3 times. Therefore, flee to your place now. I said I would honor you greatly, but behold, the Lord has held back from honor. So he's not going to pay Balak anything. And who's he blamed for it? He blames God. It's God's fault. I'm not paying you. You only spoke what God said. Okay? And then in 12, Balaam said to Balak, did I not tell you, your messengers from whom you had sent to me, saying, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything contrary to the command of the Lord, neither good nor bad, of my own accord. What the Lord speaks, that I will speak. Now behold, I am going to my people. Come, and I will advise you on what this people will do to your people in the days to come. He took up his discourse, another discourse, and said, and you can read right down through here. And if you come to verse 20 with me, please. And he looked at Amalek, and he took up his discourse and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his end shall be destruction. Then he looked at the Kenite and took up his discourse and said, your dwelling place is enduring, and your nest is set in the cliff. Nevertheless, Cain will be consumed. How long will Asher keep you captive? Then he took up his discourse and said, alas, who can live except God has ordained it? But ships shall come from the coast of Kittim, and they shall afflict Asher and will afflict Eber, so they also will come to destruction. Then Balaam arose and departed and returned to his place, and Balak also went his way. Well, that's the whole story of Balaam almost. There's one more verse where Balaam appears here. Okay. And I'm not going to go into everything in verse 25 because I want to wrap this up in Numbers here. But in verse 25 or chapter 25, verse 1, while Israel remained at Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab, for they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, and the Lord was angry against Israel. The Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders of the people and execute them in broad daylight before the Lord, so that the fierce anger of the Lord may be turned from Israel. The last of their rebellion here before going into the land. In fact, Phinehas, coming from Aaron, he found one of the leaders with a woman, in one of the tents, and he just took a spear, and they were together right through both of them. Just read it the next few verses, and you see that. And it's called here in my Bible, the zeal of Phinehas, all right, as you look at it. Now, let me just slide through here and bring out a couple points, if you would. In chapter 27, you're going to see the law of what we call inheritance, okay? From generation, tribe. Then the laws for offerings in chapter 28. Then the offerings of the seventh month in chapter 29. Then the law of vows in chapter number 30. Okay. Then we have in 31 the slaughter of the Midians, where the Lord spoke to Moses, take full vengeance, for the sons of Israel on the Midianites. That's Balak and his gang. But notice if you come down to verse number 8, all right? They killed the king of Midian along with the rest of their slain, Evi and Rechem and Zur and Hur and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian, and they also killed Balaam, the son of Beor, with the sword. So poor old Balaam got sucked into this whole thing, and he ends up dead. A poor man didn't get what he paid for. Okay, as you think of this, and so as you read through the rest of Numbers, all right, there are a number of lessons to learn. One of them that I thought was very important is that God gives the cities of refuge. People who commit, not murder, but manslaughter can go to this place. They can be there until there's a court that finds them innocent or the high priest dies. Then they're free to go. Now, a murderer couldn't do that. He was taken care of, all right, as you see that. Called the city of refuge there in chapter 35. But there is one more very important chapter here. Chapter 36. It's called Inheritance by Marriage. Here, God gives the women of Israel the same rights that the men of Israel had. In other words, if a Jewish woman's husband died, all right, the land, the inheritance would go to her, all right? And if a woman lost her husband, or a daughter of a certain tribe married a man, okay, from another tribe, okay, and the daughter who got married, her dad died, and she was the only living person to get the inheritance, it wouldn't go to the new tribe, it would stay in the old tribe. So you can read that in 35. But come back with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I found Numbers very enlightening to me, especially with one subject which I'm not prepared to teach on. And that subject is the conscience of man and what it's made of. and how it works. And it's found in the writings that my brother Tim has sent me of the new way, if you want to call it that. Okay, new thinking, uh, and it's something that you and I should understand about the conscience, because the conscience can be a place of blessing and a place of cursing, actually. Okay, as you look at it. But when we come over here to chapter 10, if you would, let me just read down a couple verses here. Verse 1, for I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. Now, is he speaking to Israelites here? Well, probably is, but there's lessons for all of us here, all right? And all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them. That rock was Christ. So if you want to know, well, does the Old Testament speak of Christ? Well, Paul tells you it does right here. You can take you back to Numbers, where God fed them the manna, he gave them the water out of the rock, etc., etc. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. Now, these things happened as an example for us, so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved. And there's a lesson that you can learn from what you read in the book of Numbers. I left. I'm going to go back to Numbers here real quickly. Okay. Because there's a second census that's taken. Okay. Let me see if I can find it. Yes, chapter 26. Right after that sin of the people there in chapter 25 with Moab, playing the harlot with Moab, that's the end of that first generation that came out of Egypt. Okay. And chapter 26, a census of a new generation. These are the people now that God is working with to take them into the land, beginning here in chapter 26. All right, 26. So actually the 40-year time frame, right, of the wandering in the wilderness ends there in chapter 20:21. Okay. And they're there opposite of Jericho on the other side of the Jordan River, ready to go in. So that's what you see from chapter 10 to about chapter 20 is the 40-year period. Okay. And you go back to chapter 1 if you want, which happens a month after the end of Exodus, and add that time to the 40 years wandering. But it's very interesting. I find the Old Testament interesting in these respects of the practicality of God. All right. I know a lot of people died that first generation. They were an evil generation. Moses called them that, okay, along with God. So it was a sad situation, but what happened? There was a generation that's going to go into the land that Joshua is going to take. All right. Miriam dies in Numbers. She was the oldest of the children. Then Aaron dies. Then Moses dies. All right. Then when all three of them are dead, then it's time to go into the land. All right. Under new leadership of Joshua and Caleb. All right. And so that's where it is. Okay. So we did an overview actually here. Numbers, I didn't do very well last week with it, but we did an overview of the book of Numbers. So next Wednesday we'll begin something new. Okay. More into the New Testament than the Old Testament here. So I hope it's been a blessing to you.